32% said church members seemed judgmental or hypocritical, and 29% said they didn't feel connected to others who attended. 77% named religious, ethical, or political beliefs for dropping out of church. Of those, 25% said they disagreed with the church's stance on political or social issues, while 22% said they were only attending to please someone else. And 63%, and I think this is the most shocking one, 63% said student and youth ministry reasons contributed to their decision not to go back to church. Of those, 23% said they never connected with students in student ministry, and 20% said the students seemed judgmental or hypocritical. Now, all is not lost. Of those 2/3 who actually drop out of church, at least 1/3 of those return when their life stabilizes, whether it be getting a job or getting married and starting a family. But whatever the statistics tell us, we do know that it's important to be aware of these trends and to be sure that we are engaging with our young people in a sincere and caring way. Now, there aren't any easy answers, and that's not what our show is about tonight, but our guests are 3 excellent examples of those who love God and serve within the church in various ways while reaching out to our young people. So tonight we do have 3 guests who are playing an important role in helping our young people connect to Christ and the church. So I want to introduce them in alphabetical order, and I'm so happy that they're with us tonight. Catherine Glitzen is currently a middle school mathematics teacher at St. John of San Francisco Orthodox Academy. She's a graduate of Pepperdine University with a BS in Italian language and literature, where she was also a Fulbright scholar, and the University of San Francisco, where she has an MA in teaching. She's a former intern for IOCC and is the education ministry coordinator at her home parish of St. Nicholas in San Anselmo, California. We also have Father Alexander Karanda, who is the dean of the historic Holy Trinity Cathedral in Chicago, Illinois. Since graduating from St. Tikhon's Orthodox Theological Seminary in 2014, Father Alexander has enjoyed serving the church in his hometown of Chicago. He serves as the Director of Communications for the Diocese of the Midwest and enjoys serving the divine services and going for walks with his family. And finally, we have Father Jonathan Lincoln. He's the associate priest at St. Joseph Orthodox Church in Wheaton, Illinois, where he's been serving since 2018. He graduated from St. Tikhon's Orthodox Theological Seminary with his wife, Matushka Megan, in 2017. They have 2 daughters. He's currently studying the works of St. Ephraim the Syrian, his hero. And I want to note that all 3 of these fine people are our teachers in the Orthodox Church in America's online church school for middle and high school students, which takes place every Tuesday evening online at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Dear friends, all 3 of you, welcome to Ancient Faith Today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Are we all there? I want to hear a third. Are we all there? Father Jonathan, Father Alexander, are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I am here, yes.
Very good. Perfect. Excellent. So there are 3 of you tonight. So obviously it's going to be a little bit tricky just to kind of try to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to speak. And I'm so excited to have this conversation because, and I have always been one who's been very transparent with you and transparent with our audience. This is a problem that a lot of parishes are grappling with. And one of the statistics that I said really surprised me was the idea that contemporary youth ministry seems not to really resonate with young adults. And in fact, I had a comment on Facebook tonight basically saying just that, you know, we should hopefully eschew any kind of programmatic aspect of of trying to attract young people through some kind of formula. But we'll get questions in a second. What I would like to do is each one of you, and we'll just go again in alphabetical order. We'll ask Catherine first. Catherine, want to get to know you a little bit in terms of your relationship with the church. So obviously, you graduated from college not too long ago. You are obviously working in the church, and full disclosure, your uncle is Archbishop Alexander, who is the bishop of the Diocese of the South in the Orthodox Church in America. Have you always been close to the church, and have you always had a life of faith, or is it something that maybe you stepped away from as we chronicled in the beginning and came back to? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I did grow up Orthodox at my home parish, St. Nicholas Orthodox Church. And I think more or less, God blessed me by giving me Orthodox parents. I had an Orthodox upbringing, going to church quite regularly. There was that moment of needing to transition from a childlike faith to like a deeper understanding of, for instance, I went to a Protestant college, so I kind of had to realize, why should I stay Orthodox instead of convert to this other kind of Christianity that seems very zealous and very on fire in other ways.
Oh, wow.
So intellectually, I just kind of had to realize, like, what does the Orthodox Church have to offer that makes it superior to the Protestant churches? And so, like some contemporary authors really helped me with that, like Alexander Schmemann, Anthony Bloom. And so I didn't really fall away from the church. I just had kind of like some doubts. But after those subsided, I've been just like blessed to be surrounded by Orthodox community ever since then. And I'm still at the church that I grew up going to. So.
Outstanding. And that speaks a lot about your family upbringing, but also your parish, that you're still there. You're in your home parish, that they have a place for you to minister. And thanks very much for sharing that. I really appreciate it, because it helps a lot, help us understand where you're coming from. So let's again moved on to Father Alexander. Father Alexander, tell us a little bit about your spiritual journey, especially as a young person. And, did you grow up in the church? Did you have any sort of doubts or fall away from the church at all? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, thank you very much for having us on tonight, Father Tom. We enjoy your show, and it's I know all of us are excited to be guests on your popular show this evening. So, and a great topic too. Like you said, some scary statistics, and that I certainly witnessed growing up. With friends and even people in the church. I was blessed. Both sides of my family uniquely were Orthodox, and I say uniquely because that's not something that's common in this country. But both sides, even going back to grandparents, when they immigrated to Chicago here, they founded a church, and my family's been very dedicated to the church since then. Specifically, my grandfather was the choir director at the parish and was always very close to him. So I had a very close and intimate upbringing with the church, and something that from a very young age was very important to me and a vital part of my life. Fighting to go to church as often as I could, and I was always blessed to have a grandfather who was a choir director that was always in church and always had a ride there. So, and then even through high school and college, I had the blessing of traveling with Vladika Job Osaki of blessed memory. He was the diocesan hierarch for the Midwest in the OCA, and was able to travel with him. So I even picked a college that was close enough to come back and to be with him and to attend services on the weekend and things like that. So, and then the goal was always to get to seminary and whatnot. So So it certainly was not without temptation or struggle, especially
Right.
with friends and daily activities and choices I had to make. But at the same time, really blessed with the path I was on and the mentors I had in my life.
Right. Father Alexander, before we go on to Father Jonathan, I did want to ask you, though, what about your friends that were also Orthodox, or maybe even weren't Orthodox, but grew up in some religious setting? Did you notice at all that they were falling away from the church? Was that something that you witnessed in your circle of friends?
Yes, certainly, and kind of in a scary fashion for me in a lot of ways. There's some friends I had in high school, even college, that were so zealous for their faith, for their tradition, and it intimidated me a bit because I thought I was on fire for my faith, and then when I was around them, the way they kind of talked about their faith and engaged, it was always really inspiring and, like I said, a little intimidating. But then to kind of travel with them as friends over the course of 4 years in college, even high school, not even by the end of those 4 years, even prior to that, a lot of them completely fell away from their faith and no longer were interested. And it almost happened in a blink of an eye, and it was terrifying to me because these were people I related to in a sense of our faith and our love for Christ. And the next thing you know, it was kind of very quickly something that was no longer part of their identity during that time, and something they kind of, it just petered out quite quickly, which was, they grew up in it like me too, so it's kind of interesting to see that. And like I said, a little terrifying how that kind of developed so quickly.
Exactly. And I think that's, one of the points that I have noticed in my life is as kids have come and gone in the parish. I've been there for 20 years, but I was actually ordained later in life. People come and go very quickly. And I think you used the perfect word. It's shocking because you wonder why that happens so quickly. Father Jonathan, thank you for joining us tonight. So tell us about your spiritual journey. As a young person, were you a churchgoer, and did you fall away at all? Did you come back? Tell us how that worked for you.
Sure. Thank you again for having us on tonight. My story is a bit different from the other two. I grew up in the Evangelical Friends Church, and although somewhat similar, we went to church every week. I went to youth group every week. There was a time in high school I was probably at church at least 4 days a week because of different things that were going on. So I was extremely involved. And yet, when the difficulties of life, some issues with my family came up, other things I was going through, by the time I got to college, I went to an evangelical Protestant college. I did have a crisis of faith, and I left behind Christianity for about a year. I wasn't exactly sure if I was an agnostic or an atheist. If there was a God, I was mad at him.
Wow.
So I wasn't really a real atheist. I think I was just an angry Christian who was trying to figure out how can there be a God who is supposed to love us, and yet these awful things happen. How did he allow that? And so my my response to that is, well, I'm just going to take my toys and go home. So it wasn't until about a good year after I decided to not be a Christian anymore, which is a terrible year. I'll tell you. Growing up as a Protestant, like I knew that God was real. I knew that I loved God. But then when I decided that I didn't want to be with God, man, that was awful. So I guess I sort of knew always in the back of my mind that I was going to come back to him, but I wasn't sure how. Thank God the Lord put a chaplain in my life at the college I was at the time, who guided me towards going more high church. So I visited some other churches, and eventually I found the Orthodox Church, or the Orthodox Church found me. And I had somebody who was a new convert who was very vocal about his faith, in a class in college, and he invited me to come, and it was the it was the Canon of St. Andrew of Crete. It was my first service I came to, and
Wow.
everybody's falling on their face and have mercy on me, oh God, and have mercy on me. And it was, yeah, it was crazy. Like, it was so weird, but so good at the same time.
Right.
Like, I have no idea what's going on, but what they're singing resonates with my soul. I've been coming ever since. So thank God.
That's
I mean,
amazing.
I found in the church healing and really the peace of God and the strength to deal with some of these things that came up earlier in life.
Sure.
I didn't have before.
Sure. Well, you have a lot of experience in maybe empathizing with young people that feel like, the church is not worth their time, at least at a certain time in their life. So I appreciate you sharing that story with us. So, dear friends, let's go ahead and remind our listeners, we'd love to hear from you. 1-855-AF-RADIO. There's no need to be shy. Call in. We're all here kind of in the same boat. We are struggling with the same issues. Maybe you are a young person. Maybe you're in high school. Maybe you're in college. And you are having doubts about the church. You're having doubts about God or about your faith. We have three, I hesitate to say, I even asked my wife, I'll tell you guys, I said, can I call young priests young adults? I said, I'm not even sure, what I should call you all, but you all are, you're young adults. I mean, I think that's, you're certainly adults, but you are young also. And so I think that's what you bring to the table today. So if you are a young adult, if you are a teenager and you are having some questions or difficulties, you have three empathetic voices here that are waiting to take your call. Or if you have some ideas to share, please call in and let us know. Also remind you that you can put in your comments at facebook.com/ancientfaithradio for tonight's show. Also, you can go to facebook.com/ancientfaithtoday. Okay, so let's get to the first question here. In terms of, our society is changing rapidly, even maybe when you all were going to college and, the difference between then and today, if it's just, 5, 6, 7 years, there are a lot of changes that have happened lately. So knowing what you know about the youth and teens and people in their 20s, what thoughts do you have simply about today's youth and their relationship to the church? How would you describe the current situation in Orthodoxy and in the larger society? In other words, what are you sensing in your parish, among young people? Where are we at? Are the statistics true? Is there an issue here that we should be concerned about? Let's go backwards now and let's ask Father Jonathan first. Father Jonathan, what kind of things are you seeing in your own parish? You have a very large parish there at St. Joseph's in Wheaton. And I'm sure you have a lot of different families. You might have young people that are falling away or staying in church. What's your sense? What's your sense of what's really going on at this particular moment with young Orthodox Christians?
Sure. I think there's quite a range. I don't think it'd be wise to generalize. Although I think there are definitely trends. It does seem like, with the teens that we have on our class Tuesday nights, we just had ours a little bit over an hour ago.
Mm-hmm.
There are definitely some that really, really make an effort to make church a priority. And I think that comes out of their families. I made church a priority when I was growing up because my family made it a priority. We read the Bible together. We went to services together. I saw that my parents were living a Christian life, and that told me this is something I ought to do too. I think that when the families aren't living it, when they're not pushing for prayer, when other things become a priority, perhaps not on purpose, but just because that's the way the life
Right.
goes, we get busy, we do other things, we have so many interests, and we want our students to be well-rounded before going to college, and then there are a lot of other things that can take up our time. So I think sometimes it happens imperceptibly that our relationship with Christ is no longer the main priority. And then that just sort of happens by itself. I'm looking at some of my plants that I started this summer, and I brought them in from outside because it's cold here now. And I have a couple of lavender plants, and they've been inside for a couple of weeks, and they're dying because they don't have enough sunlight.
Oh my.
And I also forget to
Wow.
water them sometimes, so that also contributes to it. But oops. But when you deprive a plant of its vital nutrients, it's not going to thrive. And I think sometimes in our families we starve ourselves of vital nutrients without realizing that we're doing that.
Yeah, somehow I think the popular understanding of youth ministry, which sort of came from the Protestants, maybe in the 1980s and 1990s, was to have and I was a youth minister in Louisville, very large parish, and we kind of copied that model. We had a youth night, and we had engaging talks and so forth. But it does seem that, unfortunately, maybe parents think, well, that's the church's job to bring our kids up in the faith, and we don't have to connect them at home. Do you think that's a problem, and that's maybe one of the factors?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And as a young priest who's only been in ministry for a few years, I've definitely heard this from older priests too, that by the time teenagers are teenagers, by the time they've already been formed, by the time they've already really seen how their families live and how they relate to church, if they're expecting that the church is going to be able to, I hate to say it, magically bring people back into the fold, they're very much mistaken. This needs to be something that's inculcated from a very young age.
Good.
If we have the opportunity to do that.
Right.
And that means that we're living.
Well, there's always that opportunity.
They see us doing that. There is, and there's
Right.
always the time to change. There's always time, if I saw, oh, gee, Dad went to confession again. Man, I should really go. We see our parents do those things. I've got a 2-year-old who does absolutely everything that I do and says everything that I say. And hopefully she'll see. She learns by seeing, not so much by what I say. And I'm learning that as a pastor, that my job is not so much to do as it is to say, as it is to do. And then when people see that example, then they can follow that.
Excellent. Father Alexander, what are you seeing on the ground? You have, again, the cathedral in Chicago, very important place, very important area, storied past. I know that cathedral very well. I know many people in that cathedral, and I know that, that neighborhood has gone through various changes and is sort of back on the upswing again. So what are you seeing in terms of what's happening with young people? How would you describe the situation from your vantage point?
The way I see it is I see it the way exactly the way your number is reflected in the beginning of this. This kind of larger departure from younger kids. In high school you're still kind of locked in with your parents a bit. So if your parents are coming, you're going to be there. So there's a little more of a kind of like you said, what 22% comes, to please someone else.
Right.
They might be in that category. In college, maybe you come home, it's sentimental to come back a bit, but maybe you're not too involved on the way back when you're back at school. But I'll tell you, specifically here at the cathedral, we've had this great kind of resurgence of young people within the parish. It's kind of funny with your introduction about calling us young adults. Before I got really mad and hung up, I thought I'd at least get a chance to respond here. It's funny. So we have this kind of resurgence of younger people, and I started this group to kind of get together monthly, and we call ourselves young adults. But I laugh because we're not really, we're getting in that weird spot where we're not so young adults anymore. And I'm talking, our group is basically kind of mid-20s to like 40, close to 40 now. But we're kind of all in that same path, and so many have just returned to the church. Like you said, kind of settling down in life. They've done their traveling, they found their job, and now they're serious about marrying someone or having children, and realize that there's something really important missing. And in most cases, some of these people had an influence or an example from their childhood, which kind of brought them back to the church or something culturally. And in other ways, just kind of being fed up with the culture, with the pull of, and the kind of the divisiveness of culture, and this kind of heavy secularism that's going on. They're looking for something more, and finding the ancient faith, through various means and research, and of course the internet. So we've really had a boom here of younger adults joining the faith, and right in that kind of sweet spot that you mentioned early in the program about, kind of settling into life and feeling a big gap. Kind of what's more appropriate, I think, for that than the prodigal son in so many ways, that beautiful parable that is constantly a reflection of our spiritual journey. It's having gone to confession today, and with my father confessor, he mentioned that and talked about how the fathers say that that's a continual process that we do throughout the whole day, that parable, with our thoughts and our mind returning to God. And then you also see this kind of very physical, almost this real time and place, kind of like it was astonishing that these people that I was talking about earlier, my friends and colleagues in college, just kind of lost their faith and were gone. And then all of a sudden now it's kind of interesting to see people almost, again, at the drop of a hat, see this being something important and vital to them, and attending the services regularly and getting involved in ministry and wanting to make it a vital part of their life, So it's good. Kind of goes both ways on that.
Yeah, that's a very hopeful sign. I'm very happy about that you are experiencing that also. Catherine, I'm going to ask you the same question. We are at the bottom of the hour, so let me know what are you observing now? You're the middle school teacher, so we're talking about maybe people that are just a little bit older, but I'm sure that you encounter them in various ways. What is your sense of what's going on with Orthodox youth in terms of them staying in the church, leaving the church? What's going on there from your vantage point?
Yeah, and I did want to take a second and also say thank you for having me on, because I realized I forgot to say that earlier, so thank you so much.
Oh, no, I'm happy to have all of you.
Yeah, so I was really taken aback, just like you, Father Tom, about the statistic with youth ministries driving people away, because in my experience, that's not really borne out. I've been a part of a lot of the amazing Orthodox youth programming that's out there. For example, Youth Equipped to Serve by Focus, OCF, and other things too, Church Camp. And I'd have to say that the youth I know that have remained engaged in church, pretty much all of them are engaged in one of these programs because I think multiple reasons. They have peers in, that they meet through these experiences. Whereas the group, because not all of them stay engaged, of course, the ones that fall away are the ones that aren't participating in these programs. But just like Father Jonathan was saying, they might not have the best example at home of what it means to be an Orthodox Christian, go to church, pray, live a Christian life. So I think there's kind of it's definitely complex, like an interplay of like uh, their family example, their like where they're able to form meaningful connections with peers. Um, but there, like Father Alexander said as well, I do see a lot of zeal and enthusiasm. If we extend the definition of youth up to young adults and college age and beyond, there certainly are a lot of converts in our community as well. But then on the other hand, there's the ones that grow up Orthodox and then stop coming for one reason or another. And my sense is that one of the reasons why they stop coming is because they have found their identity in something else. Because adolescence is a time when people are, they have a lot of questions. Everything's kind of up for grabs. They don't know maybe if God's real. They don't know who they are as a man, an adult young man or woman. Maybe they're dating someone who's not Orthodox or not Christian. So, you know, how do they that? And for answers wherever they can find them, and hopefully they're finding them in the church. But if they're finding them outside of the church, then I think there's a good chance that they end up not coming to church as an adult until maybe one of those later life events happens, like having kids. But yeah, so that's my sense. Like, so go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, your observation was really very insightful, especially about the idea of sort of finding a different meaning in their life and finding other ways of fulfilling their life. I think that's something that I want to talk about in our next segment. What we're going to do is we're going to take a break. We're going to encourage our listeners to call in 1-855-AF-RADIO. And if you have a question or a comment about youth ministry, about keeping our youth, about problems that we're having, please let us know. We have a caller on the other side of this break. We're going to take a very short break, and we'll be right back.
Father Tom will be back in a moment. In the meantime, the lines are open at 855-237-2346. Don't go away.
So here's a question for you. What does it mean to think Orthodox? What are the unspoken and unexplored premises and presumptions underlying what Christians believe? Orthodox Christianity is based on preserving the mind of the early church, its phronima. Dr. Jeannie Constantinou brings her more than 40 years' experience as a professor, Bible teacher, and speaker to bear in explaining what the Orthodox phronima is, how it can be acquired, and how that phronima is expressed in true Orthodox theology, as practiced by those who are properly qualified by both training and a deep relationship with Christ. Thinking Orthodox, now available at store.ancientfaith.com. That's store.ancientfaith.com.
We're back with Ancient Faith Today and Father Tom Soroka. Give us a call at 855-237-2346. Here once again is Father Tom.
Welcome back to Ancient Faith Today. We're talking with Father Jonathan Lincoln, Father Alexander Karanda, and Catherine Glitzen, and we're talking about keeping youth in the church. And so these fine people work with youth in various capacities, and they're giving us their observations and thoughts about this very important topic. So what we're going to do right now is go to the phones. We have Craig is on the line. Craig, welcome to Ancient Faith Today.
Thanks, Father. Excuse me, and thanks to all the fathers and to the young lady in the room there for taking the time to hear what I have to say. I appreciate it.
Thanks for calling.
So let me, as full disclosure, my family and I, we're relatively new Orthodox Christians. We were chrismated just a few months ago this past spring. We come from a Roman Catholic background. So what I'd like to discuss is kind of from the perspective of that Roman Catholic background when I was involved in youth group ministries for several years, and some of the things that I learned along the way and some of the things that I think the other folks working with me learned that helped us as it specifically pertains to young men and them retaining the faith. So what we were finding over the years is much like what you had discussed earlier, Father. You know, the Catholic Church largely had also imported a very Protestant, almost superficial, thin approach to youth group. You know, felt banners and sing songs and share your feelings, and it was rather kind of shallow. And what we noticed as the years went on with various pastors is that all of the youth were falling away. Well, not all of them, but a large percentage of them were after they, left high school, went off to college or started their lives. But in particular, young men would just almost entirely and completely fall away from the faith. Either while they were still in high school, they would become completely disinterested in these youth groups and catechetical programs. And almost certainly after that, we never saw them again. So at one point, many years ago, a priest came in and he gathered all the men up who he knew were devout practicing members of the parish. And he explained to us that one of the things that was missing so much in our culture today, especially in the West, is young men actually finding their identity as men. That we live in a culture that largely no longer, challenges them to being masculine and chivalrous and doing the things that Christian men had always done in the past. So he asked us to start a group where we specifically worked with young boys starting at about the age of 12 all the way through high school. And what we did was we developed a program just for the boys. What the girls had their thing too, but this was separate and unique just for them. And we began to, instead of giving them, kind of a thin, superficial, share your feelings type experience of youth group, we began to challenge them. We began to challenge them to assist at the altar. We actually set up different roles for them. So, for example, in our parish, what we did was we created the Knights of the Altar for the young men. And you would start at the age of 12 as a squire, then you'd work your way up to apprentice, and then eventually you would be a knight. And all along the way, the other young men and the priest and the deacons in the parish are mentoring these young men. They are challenging them to learn more, to understand more. And these young men would graduate one step after another. And what we saw was when we gave them that challenge, when we gave them that sense of chivalry and honor and duty to their faith and to God and their community, that is, I think, an inherent characteristic of all young men, they came alive. No longer were they staring off at the wall or disinterested in the typical stuff we were doing. They were passionate about it. And they competed with one another, and they loved it. They took ownership of it. And all along the way, we also required them to go deeper and deeper into the faith. We never thought that, hey, you know what, a 14-year-old kid, they're incapable of understanding, the deeper issues of truth, goodness, and beauty. No, I mean, we did. We challenged them to do that. We challenged them on a theological level, on a spiritual level, in their prayer lives, and as they work their way up in service to the altar. And all along the way, we would have graduation ceremonies. The squire has become an apprentice. The apprentice is a knight. Receive your coat of arms. And it just enlivened them. And the interesting that happened was we continued to track this as the years went on. And what we found was, and this is actually very biblical, about the husband and the men being the spiritual and temporal leaders of their families. As these young men took a deeper ownership of their faith through this challenge, through this, almost chivalrous mode in which we did it, as they left, they kept that faith. They kept that faith, and I'm still hearing stories today about these young men that are now in their mid-20s, and they're getting married, and they are devout Christians families, and they are bringing their wives and their children to church. And it just seems to be, it's borne a lot of good fruit. So just from that perspective, I think the way we deal with young men and youth groups in particular could take a lesson from that. I mean, there's not a one-size-fits-all approach to both little girls and little boys. So,
yeah.
We're different. We're different. And men need to have that interest sparked within them.
Let me try to summarize, though, what the point that you're trying to make. In other words, what did not, and I hate to use the term work. In other words, it was not effective, and in fact, it drove people away to have a sort of like the typical emotional, whatever that model was that you were using, as opposed to something that affirmed what? Their role as a future adult?
their role as a future adult, their unique role as future men in the church, in a sacramental role that is unique and separate from that of what women may experience. Just giving them a sense of belonging to something bigger than themselves that they were born to do, that they were made to do. And also stoking up those, I think, feelings and sentiments that all young men have, whether they know it or not, that there's a certain aspect of manhood that is meant to be, chivalrous. It's meant to be honorable. It's meant to serve. It's meant to sacrifice, and to really push them in that direction. A lot of these young men, unfortunately in our culture, you've got households with up to 50% divorce. A lot of these young men had never had a father role. They never had a man in their life to challenge them to be a man and to act like a man and to pursue something like a man in honor and dignity and in love. And just invoking those natural, I think, masculine desires within them, it really, they took to it. They really did take to it.
So let's ask maybe Father, since it's Father Jonathan, since you came from an evangelical background, let's maybe get your reaction to this. What Craig is saying is that they sort of rejected the typical Protestant ministry that was going on, at that time, and they went for maybe a little bit of a deeper dive with these youth and young adults. What's your reaction to that? Does it have value? Do you think there's application there for the Orthodox?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your thoughts, Craig. I thought that was fantastic. I think it's helpful because you can approach it from two different sides. I remember Archbishop Michael at St. Tikhon's saying, "First you lose your morals, then you lose your faith." And that really has stuck with me. First you lose your morals, then you lose your faith. And it sounds like what Craig is describing, the way of building a relationship of trust and respect in which young men feel like they're valued, and then they can open up about some of these things. I mean, let's face it, for young men, the temptation to sexual sins are incredibly difficult. And if we're not giving them an opportunity to talk with other men about these things, they might not want to talk to their brother or their dad about it, But if these things remain unchecked, then they're just going to go along the way of the world, and then they're going to be lost to the church. And I think the biggest thing that Craig was talking about is building that culture of mutual respect. When I was in youth group growing up, I definitely felt like I was respected, but I don't think that I really felt like a man, like thought I was able to be myself, truly myself, which was somebody who never really liked praise and worship. I was on praise and worship bands, all of that stuff. I never really liked that. I want something deeper, something serious. And I wish I had somebody who had taken me aside when stuff was happening in my family in high school, particularly a man, and said, "Hey, I want to take you out for coffee. I want to, talk to you about this. How are you handling this?" And not being afraid to talk to young men about these temptations that they're dealing with, not being afraid of building these relationships in which they can let their vulnerabilities out, because we've already made ourselves vulnerable to them. We've already told them, "Hey man, I've got the same struggle as you do." And they see us as real human beings. So yeah, Craig, I think that sounds awesome. I wish we could do something like that. I think that sounds really cool.
Well, let's connect you two, and maybe we can get something going. Craig, we have a couple of other topics we want to get to, and we're running out of time. I appreciate your call very much. I know you and I had connected on Facebook, and I appreciate you too, and wish you all the best in your Orthodox faith.
Father,
welcome home. We're so glad to have you.
Well, thanks to all
Very
of you.
good.
God bless and have a good evening.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you. So we don't have a lot of time left, but I'm hoping to maybe get some quick hits just from Father Alexander and Catherine about what you just heard, because I think that I'm sensing that some people might bristle at that and say, well, why are we reinforcing gender stereotypes or whatever it is? And that's going to bring us to another topic in a second. But Father Alexander, do you feel like let's reframe Craig's comment here just a second and say, do you think that it would be helpful to steer away from sort of the typical youth ministry model that is really has its roots in Protestantism, and go for a more sort of a deeper experiential and formative model that we can engage young people in? Do you think that would be helpful?
Absolutely. I think you nailed it right there when you said, deeper, something with substance. I think all too often the problem with these programs is we're trying to be cool. We're trying to be relevant with the times and make sure everyone's happy and interested and wants to come back, gives good reviews to the youth group outing and things like that. And that's, kids are very perceptive, young people are very perceptive, and when they're coming to church, they want a church thing. The people that are already there, you've got them, and they're expecting a church thing. So I think when you kind of play up more of the kind of secular aspects and give them more of the world, it can be a little off-putting in a lot of ways, and I think it even becomes a little disingenuous. Sometimes we're trying to rack our brains on how to be so kind of clever or fun in developing and sharing the faith with the youth, and kind of what our caller Craig said, and what we've been going along here with is, just kind of being really genuine in what we're able to give and share, and give kids young people a sense of responsibility, and see their calling in the church and their duty as Christians, and how serious that is. I think something like that is important, as opposed to kind of trying to come up with more cute and clever kind of gimmicks, if you will.
Good point. Catherine, talking a lot about males here, but let's think about everyone, sort of men and women, boys and girls. Would this also be something that would be applicable to females? This idea of sort of a deeper spiritual understanding of our role. I think it's a little tricky, and that's going to get to my next question about social movements and so forth. How does that sit with you in terms of what you've heard so far?
I think that our caller Craig brought up a great perspective, and as he mentioned, he came to us from the Roman Catholic tradition, and I think it's important to be aware of what the Catholic Church is doing. There's a lot of Orthodox people that are worried about ecumenism and everything, but I've actually read John Paul II's Theology of the Body, where he talks about being made in the image and likeness of God, and specifically, what does it mean to be created male and female? So I do think that I think ideally that would be modeled in the family. I'm not sure. It could be a little bit awkward to talk about it with youth, but our gender identity and everything is something that we start thinking about as teens, and it gets developed as we mature into adults. So people are looking to define that gender identity, and as we're all aware, that's defined in many, many different ways now. So I think that remembering the foundations of our Orthodox teaching on being made in the image and likeness of God, being made male and female, I think that that's worth talking about, at least to some extent.
Excellent. No, that's a really good point, and it's a really good lead-in to this last question, and that is, and as a father, I have seen this myself, and I've seen it with other teens in our parish and young adults, and that is, how should we address, or how should the church address the youth about current issues, which are matters of faith for us? For instance, abortion is a really hot political topic, right? And you can see the polarization in our society over things like abortion, over things like gay marriage, over things like LGBTQ rights, et cetera, et cetera. So there's this clash between popular, and it really is youth culture in a way. In other words, popular culture has embraced the secular ideals that embrace things like abortion, homosexual marriage, etc. When they conflict with the church's message, how should the church address that with youth? Because it seems to me like that's going to be a point of contention. And some people are going to say the statistics didn't seem to be that there were that many, but I'm a little surprised at the low number. I think there's a few more that say, I'm parting ways with the church because I don't agree with their stance on X. So the question is, how do we address that, right? So again, we'll sort of start from the beginning. Catherine, do you have any thoughts on, and that's a difficult subject, but how do we address as Orthodox Christians on these issues where, we have very firm stances on abortion, on homosexual marriage, and so forth? How do we address them with our youth?
Yeah, I think that is really the question, one of the questions for today. So my first reaction is that as leaders in the church, we need to listen to what youth are saying for multiple reasons. Of course, we just want to listen to them to be respectful. But what I've found is we can't assume anything. Like someone that you might think has a certain view on something could totally surprise you. And they could surprise you in both ways, that you don't think they agree with you and they really do, or you think they agree with you and they completely don't. So just to be respectful and listen to them and find out what they really think is essential. But on the other hand, we also need to know what the church says about these issues. And I mentioned Theology of the Body. That's a really good resource from the Roman Catholic Church. I could name, some authors that I've read recently, but it's pretty easy to find on the internet, like Christian authors on these topics. I think what we want to avoid is setting the precedent that kind of like with our liberal society, we want to live and let live. And on one hand, that's well-intentioned, but on the other hand, I literally heard a teenager say the other day that she doesn't let her Christianity define her political views. And I think that we need to be wary of that. And we need to have our Christianity define our political views, or our views on these bioethical issues, which I'm not saying we need to vote a certain way or a different way, but we can't just compartmentalize it and say that we're Christian, but yet we accept all these different things.
Right.
Because if we're not
Good
setting
point.
an example, then we're not going to convince anybody. And I think the third thing to keep in mind is just there's different ways of persuading people. I think the least effective is to try to coerce them, and the most effective is to inspire. So if we're setting a really good example and youth are looking at us and seeing a thriving person who's happy, who is secure in their identity, is confident, then they're going to want to emulate a person like us, even including their views on these bioethical issues.
Excellent. And by the way, I just wanted to note here, There is an outstanding book, Catherine. I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but just for our listeners too, and that is The Theology of the Body by an Orthodox theologian. His name is Jean-Claude Larcher. Jean-Claude Larcher. He's probably one of the most outstanding Orthodox theologians extant today. He is really an outstanding writer. He speaks a lot. He does a lot of writing about illness, about the body, mental illness, physical illness. Tremendous writer. I would highly recommend understanding the theology of the body from the Orthodox point of view. So let's move on. Thank you, Catherine, for that very much. Father Alexander, how do you deal with these issues where maybe young people are hearing one message about, again, everything that we talked about under the sun, homosexuality, etc., and they're saying, look, I'm out of here because I don't agree with it, because I believe that this should happen, or I believe people should have abortions or whatever. How do we best deal with that amongst Orthodox youth?
Yeah, that I think first, certainly it needs to be talked about. Even here, I took the high schoolers we had and sat down to talk about these specific hot button issues, if you will, that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis in school, that their friends might be struggling with, and things like that. And I think it's so important to give them the full context of the faith, the full context of God's love. Because all too often we get these kind of little snippets, and certain they do, of, God hates gays, and these other sound bites, or your religion doesn't like this or approve of this. And for someone who might not be well versed in the faith or scripture, this is off-putting to them. And this is scary to them, and because they certainly don't hate someone who might be struggling with certain sins, but now they're being told their faith is, this becomes this kind of crossroad point of like, well, I can't be with a faith that endorses this or that oppresses this. But they don't really have a full context of God's love and the faith guiding us in his love and bringing us closer to that. So I think, it's not always about starting at the topic that they're addressing, right? Of, well, what does the church say about, abortion and things like that? Well, here's the church's teaching about abortion, but here's also why. It goes far beyond that of the value we have of life, of the image of Christ that we all bear in one another, and to give them a fuller context of the issues, and not just simply like, we're against this, we're for this, we like this, we don't like that. I don't think that's really helpful, in any context, especially I think with the youth, is when we're just telling them no, or we don't like it, or you can't like that, or you can't have friends like that, or something ridiculous, So I think we really have to give a fuller context, kind of like you were. I endorse that author as well, by the way. He has a lot of good books, but yeah, on the whole human being, on the image of Christ and everybody that we strive to see and, commune with through God and his love, and what that looks like. But just kind of nitpicking or henpecking at these kind of different topics to make a statement or take a hot takes, it's not effective, and that
goes for adults too. Yeah, when adults say, what is the Orthodox view on abortion? Oh, well, we're against it. Well, it doesn't help to say we're against it unless you've talked about the 15 other things that, creates that particular doctrine, about what we believe about humans, what we believe about birth, what we believe about creation, what we believe about the image of God, right? All of that is absolutely part of it. Very good. Father Jonathan, so how do you deal with these particular issues, these, as Father Alexander said, hot button topics? What is an effective way in which to explain to our youth the church's positions while sort of not having them simply dismiss us?
Sure. I think first to approach these issues with the sense that what people, sort of following what Father Alexander was saying, what people might have heard about what we believe is probably, in a lot of cases, a parody of what we actually believe. What people are fed about Christian values and these social topics is often a parody of what we believe, and there are also all those sound bites that they hear that cast us in a very bad light, or associate us with people that hate gays. They might say, this church, has a sign that says God hates fags, and then they say, okay, well, maybe my church believes that too. So not to assume that people
Good
really
point.
know what we teach, to be brave, courageous, to hit these topics head on, but with compassion, with as much compassion as we can possibly muster for the people that are struggling with these things. And like Father Alexander was saying, when people see that compassion in us, then they'll see, no, this isn't because we hate them. It's because we love them that we're saying these things. Everything that we're doing, that we're saying, comes out of our love for God and God's love for us, and living the life that God has called us to live. Because, man, we need more compassion. Especially since there are other people who are not approaching these issues with compassion. We need to be as sensitive as humanly possible, because maybe one of the people that we're talking to is dealing one of these things. Maybe maybe they've had an abortion, or they're thinking about it, or they've
point.
had problems with, identifying as a woman if they're a young man, or whatever else. So never to assume
Excellent.
anything. I think that Catherine said that too.
Excellent. What tremendous answers, and very, very helpful, very insightful. It's funny because I've been doing this show for just almost a year now, and the shows that are really engaging go really fast, and the hour is up, and we've gone even a little bit over, and you guys just were on point. And I really appreciate each one of you. Again, I want to point out to everybody, and this really is open to everybody. You don't have to be a member of the Orthodox Church in America. If you would like to, if you're a middle or high school student, you can join in on the online church school, which is at oca.org/OCS. And that is open at 7 o'clock Eastern time on Tuesdays. Now we're going to be taking a break for Christmas, but then in the new year, we will be, assuming COVID is still going on and so forth, which it looks like it will be, we'll at least be extending that as long as our three outstanding teachers are able. So in any event, dear ones, thank you so very much. I appreciate your time and your knowledge. Catherine Glitzen, Father Alexander Karanda, and Father Jonathan Lincoln, thank you all. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Father,
so
very much.
much.
It was great
Thank
to be
you,
with
Father,
you
having us.
It's been such a joy.
God bless you, and God increase your work. Again, I want to thank Catherine and Father Alexander and Father Jonathan for joining us this evening. For those who were listening in, for those who made some comments in the various chat threads, and to our caller, I appreciate everyone very, very much. There were some interesting I think, nuggets of wisdom that we heard from our young speakers today. And that is, if we are thinking about how do we keep our youth, right? We can't be reactive, but we have to be proactive. So I wrote 4 things down here that I was hearing. Number 1, engage with our youth. Give them a place in the church. Make them feel welcome. Make them feel like they're a part of the church. Number 2, listen respectfully to them. Listen to their views with patience and understanding. Don't be dismissive of them, but then be ready to explain, again, patiently and with much love, the position of the church, teaching them the sort of the great things that God has given us. Number 3, go deeper with our youth. We heard that from our caller, and we heard that expressed again by our guests. And that is, we don't have to entertain our youth. It's okay to do fun things. That's a good thing. Everybody wants to have fun, but we also want to make the time useful with them. So engage them with deeper understanding of the faith, experiential understanding of the faith about who they are truly in Christ. And then finally, and this is the most important thing, I think, for parents and for youth leaders and adults that are in the parish, demonstrate the best of our faith. If we want to keep our young people, if we want to bring them into the church, bring them into the bosom of the body of Christ, we have to demonstrate it ourselves. We can't put this off for other people and say, well, the youth minister, that's the youth minister's job. So we have to do things like we have to pray at home. We have to pray before meals. We have to pray in the morning and the evening. We have to have discussions with our children. And certainly, most importantly, we have to go to church. That is so important. And so that's our show for tonight. Remember to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Ancient Faith Today. Share out our program after that's posted. Give us your feedback and contact us with any ideas or topics that you might want to hear about. And join us next Tuesday evening for another edition of Ancient Faith Today. Good night, everybody.